She was sent on a Christmas blind date. Then a giant Apache changed everything. The snow fell softly over a small Wild West town, the kind of snow that muffled sound and carried secrets with it. A 26-year-old woman arrived there on a Christmas blind date she never asked for, believing she was simply being handed another ending chosen by others. She did not know that before the night was over, a quiet moment and a single unexpected presence would begin to change the story she thought she was meant to live. I remember the snow before I remember the man. It fell without urgency, as if the sky itself had grown tired and decided to let go. Each flake drifted like a breath held too long, softening the edges of the world, quieting even my thoughts. The train platform was little more than wood and waiting, lantern light swaying in the wind, rails humming with cold. I stood there wrapped in a borrowed wool coat, fingers tucked into sleeves too long for my hands, 26 years of living folded small inside my chest. Beauty had never protected me. It had only made people look past me, as if something fragile could not also be strong. They said this journey was a kindness. Mrs. Aldridge said it with a hopeful tilt of her chin, as though hope itself might be contagious. A Christmas blind date, she called it, a chance to begin again before another year hardened around me. I nodded because nodding was easier than explaining the tired ache behind my ribs. The town had decided it was time I belonged somewhere, preferably to someone, and belonging was a word that sounded warmer than it felt. The train arrived with a sigh, steam ghosting into the frozen air. Inside, wooden benches creaked and smelled of iron and damp wool. I sat alone, watching frost lace the windows like pale handwriting. Somewhere between the station I left and the town I was sent toward, I tried to imagine the man chosen for me. I pictured clean cuffs, practiced smiles, hands that reached only when invited. Men like that existed everywhere, shaped by rules and comfort, and they always seemed to know when to leave. I told myself not to hope for more than courtesy. Hope had a habit of embarrassing me. When we arrived, the town greeted us with silence and snow. Buildings crouched under white roofs, chimneys breathing thin lines of smoke. Christmas wreaths hung where doors would open soon, promising warmth they could not guarantee. My Uncle Samuel waited near the hitching posts, hat low, eyes kind but distant. He hugged me with the careful affection of a man unused to staying long in one feeling. "You will be fine," his silence said, and I wondered if fine was all that ever waited for women like me. Inside the hall where the meeting was arranged, candles flickered against rough walls, turning shadows into companions. I removed my gloves slowly, buying time. Edgar Boone arrived exactly when expected. He was neat, composed, and smelled faintly of soap and ambition. His smile settled on me like a coat that did not quite fit. We spoke of weather, of the train, of how quickly winter had come. His eyes assessed without malice, measuring what could be useful. I felt strangely calm, as if some part of me already knew the ending. He was not cruel when he decided. He spoke gently, regretfully, about mismatched paths and practical concerns. I listened, nodding again, my hands folded in my lap. Rejection, when it finally comes, is often quieter than the fear of it. When he left, I did not cry. I felt lighter, as though something heavy had been set down without my asking. I stepped outside to breathe, the cold sharp and honest against my face. Snow pressed the town into stillness. That was when I noticed him. He stood near the edge of the light, tall enough to seem carved from night, bare skin catching snow like scattered stars. An Apache man, broad-shouldered, unmoving, as if the storm itself had decided to take a human shape. Others watched him warily. He did not watch anyone. He simply was. Our eyes met only briefly. There was no hunger in his gaze, no judgment, only a steady awareness that made me feel, for the first time that night, entirely present. I did not know his name. I did not know why my heart slowed instead of racing. I only knew that the snow had carried me here for a reason I did not yet understand, and somewhere beneath the falling white, something patient had begun to wait. The wind shifted, lifting the hem of my coat, reminding me how thin my armor truly was. I had been sent here like a parcel wrapped in good intentions, passed from hand to hand with the hope I would finally be claimed. The central conflict pressed quietly against my ribs, the unspoken question of whether a woman could choose differently, or whether choice was always made for her long before she arrived. In the distance, a bell rang once, clear and lonely, and the sound seemed to mark a boundary I had just crossed. Behind me waited expectation and disappointment, neatly arranged. Ahead of me stood the unknown, steady and unafraid of winter. I did not move toward him. I did not move away. I stood between endings and beginnings, feeling the snow settle on my hair, and understood that the night was not finished with me yet. Somewhere inside the hall, laughter rose and fell, unaware of the quiet reckoning unfolding beyond its walls. I realized then that my life had been shaped by doors opening and closing without my consent, and that tonight another door had appeared without a handle. The man in the snow did not offer answers. He offered presence. And presence, I sensed, might be the most dangerous and generous thing of all. The snow continued to fall, patient, deliberate, as if urging me to stay in this moment a little longer. Whatever waited next would not announce itself loudly. It would arrive the way truth often does on bare skin in the cold, asking only that I be brave enough to see it. Across the yard, the Apache man shifted his weight at last, and the small motion felt like a question, one the winter night held open, waiting for my answer, while the snow kept falling around us silently. He was introduced to me as if he were a solution. Edgar Boone stepped into the candlelight with the confidence of a man who had never been made to wait for approval. His coat was dark and well-brushed, his boots polished to a quiet shine that reflected the room back at itself. He removed his hat with practiced ease, dark hair neatly parted, eyes already settled on me with an expression that suggested readiness rather than curiosity. I rose because manners required it, and in that small movement I felt the familiar tightening in my shoulders, the instinct to make myself agreeable before I had even been assessed. We sat across from one another at a narrow table dressed with a cloth too white for a room like this. Candle flames leaned toward us, flickering with every draft that slipped through the walls. Edgar spoke first, his voice smooth, carrying the cadence of someone accustomed to being heard. He remarked on the weather, the difficulty of travel this time of year, the resilience required to live where winter could still surprise a man. I answered politely, my words careful, chosen the way one selects stepping stones across uncertain water. He nodded often, as if my responses were confirmations rather than revelations. As he spoke, I studied his hands. They were clean, strong in a way that came from ownership rather than labor. These were hands that signed papers, shook agreements, closed doors gently but firmly. He asked about my family, my plans, the work I did when there was work to be had. I told him enough to satisfy curiosity, but not enough to invite scrutiny. Somewhere between his third question and my fourth answer, I felt the shape of the evening settle into place. This was not a meeting of souls. It was an evaluation. Edgar spoke of stability, as though it were a virtue that required no warmth. He mentioned land, prospects, the importance of fitting well within a community that valued order. His words were not unkind, but they carried the faint chill of expectation. I realized he was not listening for who I was, only for whether I would disrupt the life he had already planned. I wondered if he sensed my restraint, the careful way I held myself back, or if he mistook it for modesty. Men often did. I found myself thinking of the snow outside, the way it softened every sharp thing it touched. Inside this room, nothing softened. Everything remained clearly defined, edges intact. Edgar smiled when I laughed at the appropriate moments. He nodded when I spoke of perseverance, of making do with little. Yet there was no spark of recognition in his eyes, no pause that suggested he had discovered something unexpected. I was fitting neatly into a space he had prepared, and the neatness of it all left me strangely untouched. When the pause came, it arrived without drama. Edgar folded his hands together, resting them on the table between us, and looked at me with what he likely believed was compassion. He spoke of respect, of admiration, of how certain connections, though pleasant, were not destined to deepen. He said it carefully, like a man closing a door so it would not slam. I listened without interruption, my breath steady, my face composed. In that moment, I understood that the central conflict of my life was not rejection itself, but the quiet way I had learned to accept it as inevitable. I thanked him for his honesty. The words surprised even me with their calm. Edgar seemed relieved. his shoulders loosening, as if he had set down a weight he had never intended to carry for long. He stood, replaced his hat, and wished me well with a sincerity that stopped short of regret. As he walked away, I watched the back of his coat disappear into the room, swallowed by conversation and light. I did not follow him with my eyes for long. Left alone, I became aware of the room again, the murmured voices, the scrape of chairs, the smell of wax and pine. I felt no urge to weep. Instead, a quiet clarity settled over me, as crisp as the air outside. This path had never been mine. I had known it before the train arrived, before Mrs. Aldridge's hopeful smile, before Edgar Boone ever removed his hat. The realization did not wound me. It steadied me. I rose and stepped toward the door, my movements unhurried. Outside, the night greeted me with a rush of cold that felt almost kind in its honesty. Snow continued to fall, relentless and gentle all at once. I drew my coat tighter, breathing deeply, letting the sting remind me that I was still present, still choosing where to stand. The conflict I carried was no longer about being selected. It was about whether I would continue to measure my worth by the ease with which others dismissed me. As I moved away from the hall, the sounds behind me faded, replaced by the hush of winter. I sensed rather than saw the figure standing beyond the reach of lantern light. He had not moved far from where I had first noticed him. The Apache man remained still, his presence a dark certainty against the pale ground. This time, I did not look away quickly. Something in his stillness felt deliberate, as if he understood the value of waiting. I did not know why his presence unsettled me more than Edgar's polite rejection. Perhaps it was because he had offered nothing, promised nothing, and yet the space around him felt open rather than closed. I stood there, snow gathering on my hair and shoulders, feeling the evening tilt subtly on its axis. The man chosen for me had already walked away, satisfied and unchanged. The man who had not been chosen at all remained, silent and watchful, and in that silence I felt the story shifting, gathering itself for a turn I could not yet name, but could no longer ignore. He did not approach me. That was the first difference, and I felt it immediately, like a hand removed from my sleeve. I stood in the snow, breath slow, waiting for the question men usually asked with their bodies long before their mouths formed it. Nothing came. The Apache man remained where he was, near the boundary where lantern light thinned into shadow. His stillness so complete it felt intentional. Snow settled on his shoulders and dark hair without protest. He did not brush it away. He did not perform endurance. He simply existed within the cold, as though winter were an old companion that required no explanation. I became aware of my own movements in contrast, the small shifts of weight, the instinctive adjustments women make when they feel observed. Except I did not feel observed. I felt acknowledged, which was something else entirely. His eyes lifted only briefly, not scanning, not claiming, just meeting mine with a steadiness that startled me. There was no curiosity sharpened by hunger, no judgment softened by politeness. His gaze held the quiet respect of someone who understood that seeing another person was an act that carried weight. The silence between us stretched, not awkwardly, but spaciously, like a field after harvest. I realized I was not searching for words. The thought surprised me. Words had always been my armor, carefully arranged to protect whatever softness remained. Here, they seemed unnecessary. The man shifted slightly, boots pressing into the snow with a muted sound, and inclined his head, a gesture so subtle it might have been imagined. It felt like permission rather than greeting. I found myself speaking anyway, my voice low, almost embarrassed by its presence in the stillness. I remarked on the cold, on how quickly the night had settled. He listened without interruption, his attention undivided, as though nothing else competed for it. When he answered, his voice emerged slow and grounded, shaped by careful thought rather than habit. He agreed that winter had arrived early this year. He said it the way one states a fact learned through long observation, not complaint. We stood like that for a while, exchanging small truths that required no defense. I learned his name, Thokahi, spoken softly, with no insistence that I understand it fully. He did not ask for mine at first, and I did not offer it. The absence of demand felt like a kindness. Around us, the town carried on, muffled laughter and distant footsteps reminding me that life continued whether I participated or not. Yet in this pocket of quiet, time seemed to loosen its grip. I noticed the way people glanced toward us, then looked away, unease flickering across their faces like a passing shadow. I had grown accustomed to being watched with pity or appraisal. This was different. Their looks slid over me toward him, heavy with stories they told themselves. Thokahi did not react. He neither challenged nor retreated. He stood, a calm center around which judgment circled without landing. At some point, the cold pressed closer, finding the gaps in my coat, creeping along my wrists. Before I could adjust myself, Thokahi moved. He did not touch me. He simply shifted his position, so that the wind broke against his broad frame before reaching mine. The gesture was quiet, almost invisible, but I felt its effect immediately, warmth blooming where cold had been. My breath caught, not from desire, but from recognition. No man had ever protected me without announcing it. We did not speak for a long moment after that. I became aware of the steady rhythm of his breathing, the grounded presence of someone entirely at ease with himself. It unsettled me because it revealed how rarely I felt that way. I wondered briefly what it would be like to exist without apology, without the constant measuring of one's worth against another's expectations. The thought felt dangerous, like stepping onto ice that might hold or might not. Eventually, he asked if I was well. The question was simple, but the way he asked it made space for an honest answer. I told him I was. Then, after a pause, I admitted I was tired. The confession slipped out before I could shape it into something more acceptable. Thokahi nodded once, as if this were information he could hold without needing to fix. Tired made sense to him. It did not diminish me in his eyes. He spoke then of watching rather than speaking, of how silence could reveal what noise concealed. He said he had learned this young, that the land taught patience more reliably than people did. I listened, drawn by the unadorned way he offered pieces of himself. There was no performance in it, no attempt to impress. He spoke as one might speak to the fire, trusting it to receive the truth without judgment. I realized, standing there, that something within me had shifted. The rejection from earlier no longer felt like a bruise. It felt like a clearing. The man chosen for me had evaluated and dismissed me, without seeing beyond the surface I offered. This man, who had not been chosen at all, saw me without trying to possess what he saw. The conflict tightened within me, sharp and necessary. I could feel the pull of something unfamiliar, something that asked me to consider a life not defined by fitting neatly into prepared spaces. The snow thickened, falling faster now, softening the edges of the world until everything seemed part of the same quiet truth. Somewhere nearby, a bell rang again, marking the hour. I wondered if Thokahi heard it the way I did, as a reminder that time moved whether hearts were ready or not. He glanced toward the sound, then back to me, his expression unreadable but attentive. He asked then, gently, why I had come to the town. The question hovered between us, careful, unassuming. I opened my mouth to offer the practiced answer, the one that spoke of invitations and kindnesses and sensible arrangements. Instead, I hesitated. The truth pressed forward, unexpected and insistent. I told him I had been sent. The words tasted strange, as though I had admitted something private. Thokahi did not react. He did not smile or frown. He absorbed the truth and held it quietly. Sent, he repeated, not as a judgment, but as an understanding. I nodded, feeling exposed and oddly relieved. The snow continued to fall around us, a white curtain that narrowed the world to this moment. I sensed that whatever came next would require courage of a different kind than I had practiced before. As we stood there, the quiet deepened, and with it came the unsettling awareness that being seen without expectation might demand more of me than being overlooked ever had. By morning the snow had changed its voice. What fell in silence during the night now spoke in small, deliberate sounds beneath boots and wagon wheels, a quiet announcement that the world was moving again. I woke in my uncle's spare room, light pale against the frost-lined window, my body heavy with the unfamiliar sensation of having slept without bracing myself against tomorrow. The memory of the night lingered not as an image but as a feeling, steady and unresolved, like a note held just beyond hearing. I moved through the day slowly, aware of how often my thoughts returned to the edge of lantern light, to the man who had stood without asking anything of me. I told myself this was foolish, that silence could be mistaken for depth when one was already hungry for meaning. Still, when I stepped outside to help carry water, I found myself scanning the open spaces, attentive in a way I had not been before. Kindness revealed itself in small increments. It arrived without announcement, without ownership. When I struggled with the frozen latch, it was already loosened before I asked. When my hands numbed carrying firewood, a larger arm took half the weight without comment. Thokahi never intruded, never assumed familiarity, yet his presence wove itself quietly into the rhythm of my days. He appeared where effort gathered, where help might be needed but not requested. It unsettled me how naturally I came to expect this gentleness, as though it had always been waiting, and I had only just learned how to notice it. We spoke more, though still sparingly. Words were offered carefully, not as currency but as gifts. I learned that he had lived near the edge of this town for years, moving between worlds without belonging fully to either. He spoke of land as something to listen to, not conquer, of seasons as teachers rather than obstacles. When I spoke, he listened as if my words carried weight beyond their sound. I found myself sharing thoughts I had never given voice to, small truths shaped by long restraint. He did not interrupt. He did not rush me toward conclusions. I realized, with a quiet start, that he had begun using my name. Barbara. He said it once, then again, each time with the same calm respect, as if naming me were an act that deserved care. No one had ever spoken my name like that before, without expectation layered beneath it. The sound of it in his mouth felt like an acknowledgement rather than a claim. Kindness, I understood then, was learning me slowly, syllable by syllable. The town noticed. Eyes followed us more openly now, whispers finding less need for concealment. I felt the old instinct to shrink, to protect myself by becoming smaller. But something within me resisted. Thokahi did not react to their attention. He did not harden or soften in response. His steadiness gave me a strange courage, as if his refusal to be diminished allowed me the same refusal by association. One afternoon, snow falling thick again, we stood near the treeline where the town loosened its grip. He spoke of his mother, of the way she believed kindness was a form of strength rarely understood. He said she had taught him that seeing another person clearly was an act of respect, and that respect, once given, could not be taken back without harm. I felt the words settle deep within me, aligning with something I had always sensed but never named. The conflict I carried sharpened, not between him and another man, but between the life I had been offered and the one now quietly revealing itself. I thought of Edgar Boone then, not with bitterness, but with clarity. He had not been wrong to choose differently. He had simply chosen according to a measure that did not include me fully. The difference mattered. It mattered more than I had allowed myself to believe. For the first time, I considered the possibility that being unseen was not my fate, but a consequence of standing in the wrong light. As days passed, warmth grew not from proximity, but from understanding. There was no touch beyond necessity, no words that reached toward promise. Yet the space between us filled with something undeniable. I began to feel known in a way that did not threaten my autonomy. That frightened me more than rejection ever had. To be known required courage I was not sure I possessed. One evening, as the sky darkened early, Thokahi asked me what I wanted. The question was simple, unadorned, yet it struck me silent. No one had asked me that without offering options already chosen. I searched for an answer and found only uncertainty. I told him I did not know. He accepted this without disappointment, nodding as if uncertainty were an honest place to begin. The kindness between us had become a language, one that spoke through patience and restraint. It challenged me to consider whether I would allow myself to choose, not from fear or gratitude, but from recognition. I sensed the story gathering itself again, preparing for a moment that would require more than quiet endurance. As the snow deepened and the town settled into winter's hold, I understood that kindness, once learned, could not be unlearned. It would ask something of me soon. And when it did, I would have to decide whether I was brave enough to answer. The town gathered as it always did when winter pressed hardest, not from celebration alone, but from the quiet fear of being alone with too much cold. Lanterns were lit early, their glow pooling on snow packed hard by many boots. The air carried the scent of pine and wood smoke, and somewhere a fiddle tested its strings, tentative as a heartbeat. I stood near the edge of the square, wrapped in my coat, aware of how far I had traveled without moving at all. The season had brought me here under the guise of chance, yet nothing felt accidental now. Everything seemed to be waiting. I had told myself not to expect him. Expectation was a habit I was learning to break. Still, my eyes searched the familiar boundaries where light softened into shadow, where quiet gathered its strength. When he appeared, it was without announcement, his presence settling into the evening like a truth finally spoken. Thokahi moved through the gathered people with the same calm he carried everywhere, neither avoiding their looks nor inviting them. Snow dusted his bare shoulders, melting slowly against his skin, a testament not to endurance but to ease. He stopped a short distance from me, close enough that I could sense the warmth of him through the cold. For a moment, we simply stood, the noise of the town receding until it felt like a story told somewhere else. I noticed how steady my breathing had become, how my hands no longer trembled. Whatever fear remained in me had softened, reshaped by weeks of kindness that asked nothing and offered everything. He spoke my name. Barbara. The sound carried across the small space between us, clear and grounded. I answered without hesitation, surprised by the certainty in my voice. He asked if he might walk with me. The request was gentle, offering choice rather than direction. I nodded, and together we moved away from the lanterns, toward the quieter path that edged the square. The snow there was less disturbed, each step leaving a mark that felt deliberate. He did not rush. Neither did I. The night held us with the patience I had come to recognize. We spoke of small things at first, of the way winter changed the sound of the land, of how silence could feel full rather than empty. Then, as naturally as breath turning visible in cold air, the conversation deepened. He told me he had watched me from the beginning, not with intention but with attention. He spoke of noticing how I listened more than I spoke, how I carried myself as if making room for others before claiming any for myself. He said these things without praise, without the expectation that I receive them as compliments. They were observations, offered honestly. I felt seen in a way that did not strip me bare, but clothed me more fully than I had ever been. I told him of the fear that lingered in me, the learned instinct to accept what was offered and call it enough. I admitted how often I had mistaken endurance for virtue, silence for strength. Speaking these truths felt like stepping into cold water, shocking at first, then strangely clarifying. He listened as he always did, with his whole self, as though nothing else competed for the moment. We stopped beneath a tree heavy with snow, its branches arching over us like a shelter. The town sounds were distant now, muted by space and snowfall. Thokahi turned to face me fully, his expression open, unguarded. In that instant I sensed the shift, the gathering of something that had been growing quietly, patiently, waiting for the right ground. He told me he loved me, not as a debarbaration meant to persuade, but as a truth he could no longer keep silent without dishonoring it. He said he loved the way I noticed the world, the way kindness moved through me even when I doubted its worth. He said he loved my courage, not the loud kind, but the daily choice to remain gentle in a world that often rewarded hardness. His words were steady, unembellished, carrying the weight of careful thought. I felt the impact of them not as a rush, but as a settling, like a long journey finally finding rest. He did not reach for me. He did not close the distance unless invited. He told me he did not wish to claim me, only to walk beside me if I chose it. Then he spoke the question that had been forming between us, the promise shaped into words at last. He asked if I would marry him. The world seemed to hold its breath. Snow continued to fall, indifferent yet intimate, touching everything without discrimination. I felt the enormity of the choice before me, not because it bound me, but because it freed me. No one had ever offered me partnership without conditions, love without possession. The fear that rose was not of loss, but of stepping fully into a life where I would be expected to choose, again and again, with open eyes. I thought of the woman I had been when I arrived, wrapped in borrowed wool, believing myself to be an object passed between intentions. I thought of the man chosen for me, of the path that would have narrowed my world into something manageable and small. I understood then that safety without recognition was another form of loneliness. The conflict resolved itself quietly, not with triumph, but with clarity. I told him yes. The word felt solid, grounded, entirely my own. It did not rush ahead of me or pull me away from myself. It settled into place, aligning past and future in a way I had never known was possible. Thokey did not smile broadly or lift me into the air. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, as if offering thanks to something older than either of us. When he looked at me again, his gaze held the same respect it always had, now deepened by shared intention. We returned to the edge of the town together, our steps in rhythm. The lantern light welcomed us back, casting long shadows that moved as one. Some people watched with curiosity, others with uncertainty, but their reactions no longer felt central. What mattered had already been spoken aloud, anchored between us beyond the reach of opinion. As the gathering continued, warmth rising from shared space and sound, I felt a quiet joy take root. Not the kind that dazzles, but the kind that endures. I understood that love, when it is true, does not erase conflict but transforms it, reshaping fear into attentiveness, solitude into chosen stillness. Before the night ended, I turned toward those who might one day hear this story, those sitting somewhere far from this winter square, watching through a screen, searching for something they cannot quite name. I would tell them that love does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it watches from the quiet, waiting until you are ready to be seen. I would ask them to honor patience, to believe that kindness can be strong, that being chosen matters less than choosing yourself first. If this story touched you, I would ask you to carry it with you. Like it, share it, let it find others who might need the reminder. Subscribe if you wish to walk these roads again, where old truths still find new voices. And tell me gently, from where are you watching tonight, as the snow falls somewhere, and a promise is spoken aloud at last. If this quiet Wild West love story touched your heart, don't forget to like the video, share it with someone who believes in gentle love, and subscribe to our channel for more soulful stories like this. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from, because stories like these travel far, and we love knowing how far this one reached.